Hello, 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 hello. Today I'm going to be talking about my career as an agricultural and food law attorney. Usually, when people find out which area of law that I practice, they're like, what is that? How did you get involved in that? And so here we go. I always start my story with the fact that I was born in New Orleans. So for those of you who don't know, now you know. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. And if you know anything about New Orleans or Louisiana, we live to eat. We love food. Food is a huge part of our culture. People travel here from all over the world to taste our delicious Creole, Cajun cuisine. And yeah, we love food. I believe we probably have more food festivals than any other place in the world. We celebrate everything from gumbo to the po' boy. There's a beignet fest, the mac and cheese fest, the fried chicken fest, I said po' boys. Ponchatoula has a great strawberry festival. I think it's Thibodeau has a great blackberry festival. We love food, and I love food. I used to say that I live for sport. I am definitely a foodie. I am definitely your food friend. If you ever want to go out to eat, I've developed a better relationship with food. And so maybe these days I might turn you down, but definitely back in the day, I could have just finished a meal. And if a friend called and said, hey, I'm about to go and check out this place, you want to come with me? I was always down for a meal. I love food. I love to eat. I think eating and experiencing food is one of the greatest experiences or parts of this human experience. Everything from the touch, the taste, the smell. I just love food. I really do. And so it's no wonder that I found a way to marry my love of food and my passion for law. I'm definitely not surprised. I, at one point in my life, had considered becoming a chef, but then I realized that I really just like to cook good food and that I wasn't really interested in being a chef after watching like the Food Network and cooking shows. And sometimes I just feel like they go too far in the effort of being innovative or different. And I just I realized that it wasn't for me. So anyways, I decided to be a lawyer in the third grade. And so I stuck with that. And like I said, ultimately I found a way to marry the two. So how did that happen? In another life, this life, but another past version of myself, I was a state representative for the state of Louisiana. And right after I was elected, I'd watched this documentary, GMO OMG. I love documentaries, and this one just so happened to change the trajectory of my career. So I watched this documentary, GMO OMG, and the documentary was about a guy whose son, I believe he had food allergies, but it led the man to start researching foods and found out about genetically modified foods. And really at this point, I'm not all that clear about the documentary because this was many years ago. But the point of it all is that from me watching that documentary and myself learning about genetically modified foods or being introduced to them through this documentary, I started doing research. And so as someone who loved food, but being from a city or really the suburbs, because I grew up in the suburbs of New Orleans, so the surrounding area, I never really thought about how my food was grown or where my food came from beyond the grocery store or back in those days, I was still eating fast food. So, driving through somebody's drive-through and getting my food, but I had never really thought about, again, how my food was grown or where it came from. And so when I found out about these genetically modified foods, I was really skeptical about them. I tend to be, I don't really know the label, and I really don't like labels, but for the sake of ease, if you want to put a label, put me into a box. I am someone who's known to be healthy, amongst my friends and family. I tend to eat whole foods and not the chain, although I do shop at Whole Paycheck. What I mean by whole foods is I eat very little processed foods. When I'm cooking, it's a whole ingredient. So an onion, a bell pepper with some carrots or tomato, or I know rice is processed, but oh God, I love rice. But fish or shrimp, being the Southern New Orleans coastal woman that I am, I do love seafood, although I don't eat meat. So things like beef and pork. My daddy's a country guy, and he likes rabbit and deer and all that. Don't do it. I actually have 2 bunnies. I don't see, and I get it, and I know it's food, and people have been eating bunnies forever, but they're so sweet. When I got them, I was researching, I'm going off on a tangent, but I was researching about bunnies. And so I was watching all these videos, and Lord, I stumbled across the wrong one. It was this guy, he's out in the forest. He had killed the bunny and was showing people how to prepare them, but he just held the bunny up and did that, and all the guts and everything came out. It was awful. I was scarred. But yeah, so anyways, I've always been into health. And so when I discovered these genetically modified foods, again, I then and now am still skeptical about them, just because in my train of thought, I think that as humans, we evolve and have evolved pretty slowly. And these foods haven't been around long enough, in my opinion, for us to truly know the long-term impacts that they have on the human body. And I am not a scientist. I studied business in undergrad and have a law degree. So I don't really know, but again, I just don't think they've been around long enough for us to truly know the long-term impacts of them. And in my heart of hearts, my intuition, I do feel like there is a connection to a lot of the diseases, the autoimmune and the increased rates of people having food allergies and probably some other things. I think that it is connected and tied to the food, or really shouldn't even call it food, because when you really do the research, it's a bunch of chemicals and things. So these food-like products or products that resemble foods, but I don't really think that they're food, and I think that it's impacting us and our health. So because of that, I decided to file some bills my first term in the legislature. And so I had a genetically modified, or a bill to label genetically modified foods, a bill to label foods from cloned animals. And I just kind of became known for food legislation during my tenure in the legislature. I ended up having a sugar sweetened beverage tax, because by then I really went down the rabbit hole with food issues. And as a Black woman, of course, in my lived experience, it was my observation that in neighborhoods of color, you tend to see more liquor stores and fast food establishments, and grocery stores are usually far and not as plentiful as those other types of stores. And also, being a Louisianan, we, in studies, and I don't know if it's current, but for many years we were leading the nation in obesity and obesity related diseases. You know, lots of people with high blood pressure and diabetes, things that tend to be tied to diet. And I had an opportunity to use the position that I was in to do something about it. I received a lot of pushback for that, especially the sugar sweetened beverage tax. There was a Coca-Cola plant in my parish that I was representing, not in my district, but in the parish. And for those of you who are not from Louisiana, you all have counties, we have parishes, because out of the 50 United States, we are the only state that has our civilian codal law. And that's based upon the fact that unlike other colonies in the Americas, how do I want to explain this? And y'all history people, you know, but basically like the East Coast of what is now the United States was colonized by English-speaking countries in Europe, whereas in like Louisiana, along the Gulf Coast, Alabama, Florida, which I want to say Alabama, perhaps Mobile, which we have beef with them about Mardi Gras. We'll save that for another day. But yeah, I think they were all a part of the territory of Orleans. And the state of Louisiana encompassed a huge part of Middle America up to like French-speaking Canada. So that's why in Louisiana, in like the Acadiana area, I think we have like an Acadiana parish, but places in Lafayette, really what I would consider the areas that people tend to refer to as Cajun, have that connection with French-speaking Canada, because it's my understanding when some of those people were leaving there, Louisiana was the closest French territory. But anyways, I'm off on a real tangent now. So, yes, I had filed a sugar sweetened beverage tax and lots of other food related bills, I'll say. And because of the pushback that I was receiving from industry and lobbyists that were representing food related industries like the Grocers Association and whoever else it was back then, I decided that I needed to educate myself on these issues. And yeah, I needed to educate myself so that I wasn't just using my personal feelings about these issues, and that I had some real, knowledge behind the issues that I was advocating for. And so I found that the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, the School of Law, had and still has a LLM, which is a Master's of Law. So for attorneys, having a Juris Doctorate or a JD is like having a bachelor's degree. You can also acquire an LLM, which is the equivalent of a Master's in Law. And then there's also an SJD, which is the PhD equivalent of law. So anyways, the University of Arkansas had and still has the agricultural and food law LLM program, and I enrolled in the program and went full force into agricultural and food law. And so in that program, you learn about, or there are classes geared towards labeling. And so, like I said, there are laws for everything under the sun, and food labels or labels on food products or regulated. Nutrition, we learned about the Farm Bill, intellectual property as it relates to food. So there are things like geographical indications, which is like, I believe maybe to label a wine, and I'm not sure because it's been a while, and that wasn't the area that I chose to pursue. But I think like maybe to label a wine, Bordeaux wine, it has to come from a certain region in France. But definitely, maybe I know for sure here in Louisiana, like the designation of like a Creole tomato is a very specific thing. There's also things like trade dress. So if you have a themed restaurant, you could protect that theme. So maybe it's the, or not maybe, but it would be the overall design, the menu, the colors, things of that nature. So yeah, there were many issues, but the one that I found myself most drawn to, which I think is really just in line with who I am as a person, was an issue, and it's actually what I wrote my final thesis paper on to complete that master's program, was the use of intellectual property rights to misappropriate plant genetic resources and indigenous traditional knowledge of medicinal plants. So what does that mean? Basically, or not basically, because it's not a basic issue, but what I was studying was the fact that pharmaceutical companies often go to biodiverse countries. And so the country that I chose was Colombia. And in the previous, or my previous video that I uploaded to my channel, which I believe I entitled The Boldest Thing I've Ever Done, talks about the fact that I moved to Colombia. And so, yeah, I moved to Colombia sight unseen. I had never been to the country before, but I had done some research. And yeah, like I said, it's one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. And I lived there for about 3 years. And while I was there, I researched medicinal plants and indigenous people and the plants that they use for medicinal purposes, the laws that the country of Colombia has implemented to protect the knowledge of the indigenous people, as well as the plant genetic resources. Because what usually happens is pharmaceutical companies, and maybe other companies, researchers, I don't know, I don't want to just bash the companies, but people go there and they often study the indigenous people and the plants, again, that they use for medicinal purposes. And often they come back to the West, so the United States and Europe, although China is another country that people will often apply and receive patents in as well. But yeah, so they will take the knowledge from the indigenous people that probably those people discovered, or those groups of people, cultures discovered thousands of years ago, really by trial and error. You know, at some point, someone had to look at these plants in the wild and take a chance and eat them. And probably, unfortunately, sometimes people ate things and died. And other times, you know, we discovered that, hey, it's really delicious. And it's become a part of our diets. So one good example, and you have to be of a certain age to remember this one, but I remember in the 90s, there were the Hoodia diet pills, and they were a big rage. There were like commercials for them, and they were all over the stores, but it was a supplement that people took, and it would basically suppress your appetite. and lead to weight loss. And when I was in the LLM program, I learned that there's a Sands tribe in Southern Africa. So not, they're probably inhabit a part of South Africa, the country, but I'm referring to the southern region, a southern portion of the continent of Africa. Specifically, they were in, or probably still are, in the Kilimanjaro desert. And am I? Because it's been some time. But I think it is the Kilimanjaro desert. Probably should have researched this before I hopped on here and started talking about it. But that's the thing. Don't trust me. Go do your own research. Let what I am sharing today be the springing board and the seed that's planted for you to go off and do your own research on these issues. But yes, so there was a guy who was living with this tribe. He went out with the huntsmen and observed them sucking, I believe they were like sucking or chewing on pieces of the cactus. And, he's like, why are y'all doing that? And basically they told him to suppress their appetites so that they wouldn't be tempted to eat the meat before they could bring it back to the village and share with everyone. So he documented this in his notes, and I believe it was a university, I believe, in the country of South Africa where that information ended up. And then a couple decades later, which I believe was in maybe the 60s or 70s, I'm touch and go on the timeline, but at some point, someone came across this guy's research and they picked it up and realized that the cactus did have appetite suppressing properties in it, and created those diet supplement pills that were all a craze. They earned billions of dollars, and yet none of that money was shared with the country where they sourced those plant genetic materials or the indigenous people where they acquired that information from. And so the problem with that is that usually scientists or researchers would have to get plant material and run trials for literally decades to see if plants have any medicinal properties. And I'm sure probably more often, well, no, as an herbalist, I shouldn't say that, because lots of plants have medicinal properties and are good for our healing. I truly believe that we don't need, and this is just my personal beliefs, that we don't need a lot of these synthetic drugs that we're given. And yeah, because most oftentimes those drugs or chemicals are the synthetic man-made versions of medicinal properties discovered in plants, basically. So, and I'm saying basically a lot. I gotta check myself on that. But anywho, yeah, that's what I wrote my paper on. It's a topic that is really fascinating to me. There is a plant, I know it's periwinkle, but I think it might specifically be the blue periwinkle that's found in Madagascar. It's very valuable in some cancer treatments. And I mean, they basically harvested that plant to extinction. And so the, whatever the medicines that, the man-made medicines that they've derived from mimicking the medicinal properties in that plant. Yeah. What else? Neem. Now, luckily, India was able to overturn that patent because they had a long documented history of use of neem. I want to say maybe acai had a brief patent on it, and Brazil was able to successfully overturn that one as well. But yes, y'all, do your own research. Do your own research, because I wrote this paper quite some time ago, but those are just some of the ones that stick out in my memory. But yeah, so I did that program, and I was one term and done in the legislature. I was doing way too much with my food bills. I had a marijuana bill because at that time, everything from 0 to 60 pounds in Louisiana was treated the same. There were a couple people serving life sentences in Angola, which is a state prison, for marijuana, and I just didn't think it was right. You know, I don't think people who have substance abuse problems should be incarcerated for lengthy amounts of time. Like, I don't have an issue with incarcerating, the people who are actually flying tons of drugs into the country and distributing them throughout neighborhoods, but little low-level people, and especially the users, I just think there's a better way to go about things. And so, I was just doing too much, I think. And so I was also told. And I was one term and done. But anyways, I think that I definitely wasn't meant to be a politician. I believe I was a great legislator in the fact that I, one, understood the law. I also understand the concept of a democracy, but to be there on the ground with people who don't have a background in law, writing laws, sometimes if y'all wonder like, oh, that's a stupid law, because you have people who don't understand the law writing the laws. We'll talk about that another day. But I feel like I was a great legislator, but I am not a politician. I'm not that type of person. I feel that I have the skills that are necessary, but I had to make a personal decision about who I am as a person and my morals and just, my version of right. And I just felt that some of the behavioral characteristics and things that you have to do to be a successful politician, I just wasn't willing to do. So anyways, I was one term and done, but again, I felt like that, or I do believe that I wasn't supposed to be there long term, at least not then. It really served its purpose, and that was to introduce me to my passion for agricultural food law and more so agricultural policy. And so what I ended up doing is working with primarily Black farmers, but other farmers of color, because after my 3 years in Colombia, y'all, I thought that I was gonna live in Colombia for the rest of my life. I love that country. The city that I was living in, one of the best kept secrets, and I'm gonna keep it a secret for now, although I think I talked about it in my other video. Everybody flocks to Cartagena and Medellin, and some people go to Bogota, but there's a city that is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that it doesn't become gentrified like a lot of the other popular destination cities in Colombia. Because it's just such a beautiful place, y'all. Eternal summer, 80 degrees year round. It's just like an urban jungle. And so for me, as you can see with the plants, the attire. Like it's just my vibe. But I'm from the northernmost Caribbean city, so I think it's to be expected. I'm a summer baby, I'm a Virgo, I'm an earth sign. You know, it was ordained, and I'm named after a tree and an herb. And so I truly believe that it's destined. It was destined. It was already written. It's definitely what I came here to do. So yeah, we'll talk about my spiritual beliefs another time. But yeah, so I was there about 3 years, came back to visit for my sister's wedding, stayed for Mardi Gras, which was probably about 2 months later. And COVID came through and the borders closed, and y'all know we lived through it together. Who knew that we would be on lockdown and the whole world would shut down for a year? And so at that point, I was 3 years into a 5-year residency program, but I had left the country for too long and would have had to have start over that process. And for that and some other reasons, I didn't go back. Also because my career had taken off. So during COVID, there was the American Rescue Plan Act, and in the American Rescue Plan Act, Congress had set aside $5 billion for Black farmers because there's a long documented history of race-based discrimination in the United States Department of Agriculture. And I can't wait to make a video on the history of Black farmers in the United States, starting from the fact that our African ancestors were brought to this country because they were skilled agriculturalists. Things like food crops, coffee, red beans, okra, rice, having a little brain freeze right now, rattling them off. But yeah, bananas, watermelons, all African crops. And I'm so excited to talk about that in another video. But yes, ancestors were skilled agriculturalists and came here and really created the wealth for the Western world, the United States and Europe. Yeah, let me not go off on a tangent on that, but needless to say, knowing that history, being a Black woman from the South, I am also a baby genealogist. I've done my family's genealogy. My family, the Black ones and the white ones, were in Louisiana, predating Louisiana and statehood being a part of the United States, but they were on these lands. And something that I'm very passionate about. And I ended up working with Black farmers to address the systemic racism and be a resource. I graduated from Southern University Law Center, which is an HBCU law school. And my professors at that time, a lot of them were first generation, not only first generation attorneys in their families, but just like first Black attorneys, period. Like they paved the way for this law school to be created at Southern because we were not allowed to attend the law school at Louisiana State University, which I did attend for undergrad. So yeah, those professors, though, at the time, they were instilling in us the importance of using our education to go back home and help, our communities, because I truly believe receiving a legal education is a blessing. Y'all probably already know the statistics, but like everything, it seems to be that mighty 2%, only 2% of doctors are Black, or only 2% of lawyers or engineers, and, whoever are Black. And so it's not lost on me, the privilege, and also living in this society, I don't take for granted having that legal education and truly understanding the laws, how they're created and applied in this country. I think is a real benefit. And so, be the change that you want to see in the world. And so I try to do that in the ways that I can, whether it's, being a state representative, or when I came home and, for the majority of my career and starting out, I was a solo practitioner. And so working in my community, really keeping my prices affordable so that everyday people had the opportunity to, engage an attorney to help them when necessary and when they need it. But anyways, I felt the sneeze coming on. My allergies, y'all, whenever the seasons start changing, they tend to flare up like many other people. So, and the light is fading and I feel like I'm starting to get fuzzy. So I'm gonna try to wrap this up before I lose all daylight. But I started working with Black farmers. I found a nonprofit organization that I started working with as their Louisiana-based attorney. And so I was providing direct legal services to farmers. A lot of that stemmed around estate planning. Heirs property is a huge issue in the farming community, but really in the African American community as a whole, in rural and both urban areas. It's something that led to the gentrification and the rebranding of New Orleans to NOLA after Hurricane Katrina, because oftentimes in brown and Black cultures, we would pass land through the family via, I'll say, verbal agreements, so grandma or grandpa was able to acquire property, and everyone just knew that when grandma died, the house was going to be Aunt Sheila, and then Aunt Sheila was there, and whoever, but we weren't legally opening succession and legally transferring the properties to the new family owner. Therefore, all of the legal documents like the deed and paperwork pertaining to the properties were still in the name of the original landowners. And that was a huge issue during or post-Katrina in blocking a lot of families from getting disaster relief funds because they didn't have the proper documentation to prove ownership of the properties, the family properties that they were living in and owned. So yeah, we'll talk about that another day too. But all that to say, a lot of the work that I was doing with the farmers was around estate planning, making sure that they had wills, helping them to navigate issues with heirs property, but also some other issues like agricultural leases and helping with maybe some property disputes. Maybe there was someone encroaching on their land, or oftentimes Black families were pushed out of farming due to systemic racism. And so maybe they still own the land, but they rent it out to other farmers to farm the land. And sometimes they ran into issues with that, usually around receiving the proper payments for the use of their lands. And so I would sometimes help families with those issues. And I did some policy work, primarily stemming around the Farm Bill and advocating for access to credit, because that's another huge issue facing Black farmers and really all farmers, small farmers, not industrial corporate farming, but even white and indigenous or Native American, Asian, Latino farmers face that or face issues with access to credit. And so I did policy around that as a part of my career too. And so I think I'm going to start wrapping this video up around here. But yeah, that's really how and the whys and the whats of my career as an agricultural and food law attorney. So if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Seems like I'm always wearing something with a banana, but we got some pink bananas that for the first pink bananas I ever saw in real life, I spent Christmas and New Year's in Costa Rica one year in Limon, on the Caribbean side of the country. And yeah, they have pink bananas, at least the outer covering of the bananas were pink, not the actual flesh. But yeah, so if you made it this far, drop a banana. I hope that you found this interesting. If you are a law student and you found your way here because you have an interest in agricultural or food law, I hope that the information that I shared was of value. And yeah, thank you all for watching. If anyone besides my friends happen to watch this, and I'll see y'all next time. Enjoy. Bye. Oh, don't forget to like and comment. I promise to engage, and subscribe if you haven't already, because there's more to come. But thank you again for watching.